Yay, thank you, come on down. This is the best panel of the day, you guys, so you're in for a treat. Come down, I know, it's tough. 5 o'clock is tough, you guys. 5 o'clock
I think you're competing with beer. That's a problem.
It's 5 o'clock
It is
here.
happy hour.
Oh, this is on.
It is happy
I always thought that was like my inside voice.
Somewhere is here.
It's happy hour. Come down. I'm going to stand for a minute because I was sitting up here last hour, and you guys don't know, but there's like these incredibly hot, bright, shining lights up here. Hi, Stephanie. It's really hot and uncomfortable. Come down here and suffer with us.
It's definitely hot.
So this is an exciting panel because of a bunch of reasons. So I'm Julia Z. I'm with Arabella Advisors. We are a philanthropic consulting firm, and we have the privilege of working with foundations and philanthropists to help them maximize their mission through advocacy, through philanthropy, as well as through investing. And I lead our impact investing team based here in San Francisco. And I joined the firm in January of this year, and a couple of things keep on coming up. One of them is place-based investing. We have a bunch of clients who have approached us and said, I am interested in my backyard, whether it's developing a food system in St. Louis, or if it's building up a program loan fund in a city on the Atlantic seaboard, or if it's looking for ways to support the ecosystem for small business loans in a Midwestern town. So we keep on seeing that. Safia Gulamani, my colleague who's here in the audience, and I were working on a project for a client in Baltimore. It was looking for impact investment opportunities for low-income communities, which is how we met Damien, which is why he's here. Yay, Damien, thank you very much. We're going to talk about their strategy and what they've been doing as kind of an individual who wants to reinvest and re-engage in his own community. So that's one strategy that we're thinking about. Shinola, who has never heard of Shinola, the company? Oh my God, really? Okay, so here's a wonderful opportunity to learn about a fantastic business, and after you've heard about it, you should rush down to their store here in San Francisco in Jackson Square and take a look at their product. There are a bunch of people who are representing the Shinola watch. It's fantastic. We also have a secret guest here from Shinola who doesn't want to be known, but who is one of the world's leading bicycle designers in the world, which is fantastic. And then New Orleans, we wanted to represent as well, partly because we've got an opportunity to look at time frame, right? Like if you guys will all remember Hurricane Katrina, which was in late 2005, August of 2005. What are the strategies for investment and renewal that have happened over that decade? What's worked, what hasn't worked? I think these three are really interesting cities to talk about because you have kind of an environmental disaster. You have in Detroit a sort of financial catastrophe around the bankruptcy, one of the largest bankruptcies, municipal bankruptcies in the country. And then you have, of course, I think most familiar and most recent in mind, kind of a social disaster with the Freddie Gray death during incarceration last April, I think, and then the riots that happened subsequent to that. So my purpose today, really, I was hoping that these guys would tell not only their own stories, but what's happening in their respective cities, and then find ways, hopefully, that they can be replicable in other cities. What are the lessons? How can we learn from them? How can we use them in other places? I feel like every city has some elements of what they've been through, and these are kind of extreme examples. They're very high profile, they're very high publicity examples. So that's what I wanted to talk about. Is there anybody who has something that I've missed that they deeply want to hear about before we get started? Anybody? Housing, excellent. Okay, we can talk about that. I think that actually came up in our earlier conversation about how we can look at impact investing strategies. Just really quickly, who here in the room, are you coming from like municipal government? Is anybody here from sort of a governmental agency looking for strategies? No. Are you investors, like foundations, for example, who are thinking about strategies for place-based investing? Anybody? Are you, we do have that, okay, good. Do we have high net worth or individual family office investors who are thinking about strategies? We have some of those as well. Who are the rest of you? Are you intermediaries? Are you financial advisors, that kind of thing? Okay, fantastic. What's that? Software. Really? Like a corporate foundation or looking for strategies? Oh, so social enterprises. I'm sorry, I should have talked about that. Okay, so social enterprises who are interested in the space. Okay, so, sorry? Oh, religious institutions. Do we have religious institutions here? Fantastic. Okay, good. So we have a very cool and diverse group of audience members. Thank you so much for sticking with us this late in the day. Let me get started. I'm going to introduce you guys as you speak. Damien Costa, immediately on my left, military veteran, 12 years, U.S. Navy SEAL. That's just a cool part of your bio, Damien. I couldn't resist. for the last few years, he's been working with Kevin Plank, who is the founder of Under Armour. Kevin, I think, is a born, raised, educated Maryland person who has adopted Baltimore as his home city. You guys have been doing some amazing investments across a bunch of different strategies. Can you just share some of the things that you guys have been doing, how you've gone about it, and some of the cool projects that you've been working on?
No, that's great. Absolutely, thanks. And this is super cool to be out in this pretty neat city. I mean, it's similar to Baltimore in a lot of ways, different feel. I think the traffic's a little bit worse. Took me a few minutes to get here from the airport, but no, we're doing quite a few things out in Baltimore right now. I think a lot of it, we focus on investing to drive value back to the city, and we do that for a lot of reasons. Some of them are self-serving, right? So if the city's better, then it's easier for Under Armour, which is actually headquartered there, for the people that don't know that, to recruit folks to come and live there. But more importantly, it just makes it a better place to live. And if you can see, it's a city with a lot of history, a lot of tradition that has certainly taken some wrong turns over the last 100 to 150 years. And it's gotten to a place where there was a lot of potential, but there's definitely room for a lot of improvement. When I travel and talk and do these sorts of things, I bet if I said Baltimore, generally the first thing that pops into everybody's mind is The Wire, right? So everybody's seen The Wire on HBO most likely. And while it's probably, to be fair, an accurate portrayal of what happens in the city, it's not the complete picture of the city. I mean, if anyone has visited or been there, you can certainly spend all your time and never see anything that's probably depicted in The Wire. But it's a great place to be. But it does have a lot of potential, right? And so when we look to invest there, there's two core reasons that we invest. One is to bring great companies there, and one is to keep great companies there. And we're also trying to focus on things that we understand and we know and can replicate some of the great stuff that Under Armour's done by being in the city, right? And so Under Armour started 20 years ago by a guy who just wanted to make a better T-shirt out of the stuff his shorts were made out of, and it's grown to this year they'll do just under $5 billion in revenue and doing a bit more than that next year, and they're growing on and on. So. And they employ about 14,000 people around the world, and another 250,000 or so in the manufacturing capacity to make the stuff. And about 6,000 to 7,000 of those are actually in the Baltimore region. So if you think about a company like that, if we are through in the investing efforts able to find the 22-year-old football player, the next person that could do something similar, do it in our city or do it in a city like Baltimore, I think that'd be very impactful. You keep these companies there. They have a great diverse workforce. They hire folks to do everything from pack boxes to work in marketing and everything in between, right? And so the impact these companies have is great. They generally stay for a long time. A lot of these cities like Baltimore, the Cleveland, the Cincinnati's, they're built around these foundational companies that came out of the Industrial Revolution. So, we want to find more companies like that, right?
And can you talk about that? Can you talk about City Garage and some of the things that you guys are doing to encourage entrepreneurs to stay in Baltimore and build their business and hire people there?
Sure. So one of the things that we're doing is, and again, it'll take me a while to kind of cover everything, and I'll try to keep it brief, but we decided to build a new campus for Under Armour and then build a city around that campus in what was pretty much an abandoned wasteland area. It's about 285 acres or so, give or take, and it's just off of Interstate 95, which cuts across the city. There weren't a lot of buildings or anything that you could adaptively reuse, and we had one or two, but we have to build this thing from scratch, right? Under Armour's campus is a core part of it. We're going to build a city around it, right? So when you're starting from zero, you have to build a sense of place. You have to bring innovation. You got to bring arts. You got to bring everything there to make it a cool place to actually want to go and work. So one of the buildings that we had actually sitting there was an old abandoned bus depot, and when Kevin and I first started talking about doing some sort of innovation center, the first thing that pops in your mind is doing an incubator, right? Well, we're going to build an incubator space and attract startup companies and have them come here and, the normal model. Well, we wanted to focus on product companies again, right? They need more space. They need different needs and stuff and loading docks and that sort of thing. So we took this abandoned bus depot and we converted it into this 140,000 square foot platform that allows entrepreneurs at 22 years old to take an idea from the back of a napkin, start a company, grow a company, and then watch a company like Under Armour figure out how to actually bring manufacturing back to the U.S., right? So all three of those things exist under one roof.
So thank you. There's more to talk about here, but let me move on. So sitting next to Damien is Bridget Russo, who is the head of marketing for Shinola. A lot of actually common themes, in fact, that Damien pointed out. Number one, I had never been to Baltimore before May of this year, and for sure it is one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and every single person I met there was adorable. And I think there's an element of that to all of these cities. Like when you go, you love it. People who live there are fabulous, and they're proud. They're proud of their tradition. So I think everybody knows the story of Detroit and what's happened, in the last 50 years from in terms of being an automotive powerhouse to the sort of decline that it's suffered. I think Shinola is really representative of a company that's kind of building that back. There's a pride to the business. There's job training, job creation. So I'd love, Bridget, for you to talk about what you guys have been doing and how you're going about it.
Hello, everyone. I don't think
Is your
my
mic
thing's
on?
working. I don't think so. Oh, there it goes.
Oh, there it
Thank
goes.
you. So first off, for those of you who have never heard of Shinola before, we are makers of watches, bicycles, leather goods. We're based in Detroit. We assemble both our bikes and our watches in Detroit and do a certain percentage of our leather manufacturing there as well. And really the company was started with the intention of creating jobs, world-class manufacturing jobs back in the US. So we started with the watch. Watch hasn't been made in the US in over 40, 50 years. Hamilton, in fact, was the last company to do it at scale. And we wanted to do it in a city where not only could we create jobs and make a difference, but also a city where, there was that manufacturing legacy, and certainly Detroit is one of those cities. They weren't necessarily known for making watches, but certainly automotive. So we came into town. There was a short list of cities. And the amount of support that we received both from the private and the public sector and just people saying, we've never done this before, but we want to roll up our sleeves and help you do it. So how can we help? And really it was the people that brought us to Detroit. So fast forward now, 4 years in, we're over 500 people. Of that, over 300 are in Detroit and over 200 are in manufacturing. We train individuals. We built the factory actually together with a Swiss partner named Ronda. They're one of the only independent watch manufacturers left in Switzerland. And together we invested in building a factory and also training. So a lot of the folks that are building our watches actually worked in automotive. One person was a security guard in the building. Another person was a nail technician. And they all moved up the ranks and are making watches. Today we have about 22 stores. We continue to expand, so we're currently working with the mayor's office to create a workforce development program whereby we have on-the-job apprenticeships that we offer. And if we have a job, we will place them within our organization. If not, we are preparing them for an industrial sewing job, which, believe it or not, there are many open positions out there right now because there are not enough individuals with the skill set to fill them.
Thank you so much. And there's a couple of themes that I want to explore with you guys, but let me move on to Rob first so we can hear the New Orleans story. And Rob's got a gigantic bio. I couldn't even summarize it for you. He wears many, many hats. The one that I was particularly focused on here is his role with Propeller, which is an incubator and accelerator that's based in New Orleans. He moved back to New Orleans shortly after Hurricane Katrina. He's been there for this entire time, building, teaching, doing public and private partnerships, some really, really interesting stuff. So there's all kinds of threads that I want to pull today, but can you start, Rob, by talking a little bit about Propeller and how you guys are empowering local social enterprises to solve a lot of the big problems in New Orleans?
Sure, thank you. First of all, thank you all for sticking with us. We'll make sure that we'll get you outside and get some drinks in you in a few minutes here.
Shots for everyone afterwards.
On Bridget.
Yeah, Shinola.
So thanks for hanging out. One of my favorite quotes is a Tennessee Williams quote, which is that there are 3 great American cities. Has anybody ever heard this quote? Mm-mm. Cool. Anybody else? That's awesome. You're about to hear my favorite quote, the rest of you. 3 great American cities: San Francisco, New York, and New Orleans. Everything else is Cleveland. And so I'm going to say today that actually there are 3 great American cities: Detroit, Baltimore, and New Orleans,
Whoop.
And maybe Cleveland.
Nice.
And maybe Pittsburgh,
I
and
like
maybe
it.
Fresno. Because in my mind, when you think about what makes a city great, what it is in the truly American sense is creating opportunity for anyone who wants to change their world and to create good for their community, and frankly, to solve a problem that they're experiencing. And Not to say anything bad about taking San Francisco off that list, but I'm going to, because I frankly don't think that disappearing pictures is worth a valuation of $9 billion when we have so many issues we need to solve. And so for me, when I think about the way the world needs to be, I think about the city that I love, which is a city that you find people who are just fighting. And I was in Detroit 2 weeks ago, and it was one of the most incredible things where I'm walking around, I'm like, this is the same vibe that I get in New Orleans, of just pride. People love their city, and they're building something, and they're there to make it like theirs and their children's. And I don't get that when I used to live in DC or in San Francisco, and there's a reason for that scarcity, right? Scarcity of resources, scarcity of opportunity leads to innovation, which leads to creativity, which leads to solutions. And people solving real problems in their communities in a way that they're not waiting for anyone to come, the cavalry to come, right? It's they're working hard, right?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned this to you earlier. You know, you ask people in Detroit and they say, yeah, Detroit, the comeback city. What are they talking about? We never left.
That's right.
You know, and that really is the spirit. They're like, yeah, well, you guys were all making your apps with, pictures that disappear. We were here, and we were still doing stuff and, making T-shirts and there's so many maker spaces and so many things going on in Detroit where there is that sense of pride.
That's right.
And it's like, yeah, it's nice now, we've got the cool new restaurants or whatever, but there are people there who have stayed, who have stuck around, who have amazing skill sets, amazing creativity, that are proud about their city. And there's also a consumer base. When we first opened our store in Detroit, I'd ask friends or whatever, we'd talk to people and they'd say, oh, that's nice. Yeah. What kind of business do you have? Yeah. Well, Detroit does double and triple New York or San Francisco, or LA continues to be our #1 store. And that's a case in point, and that's for, $700 watch.
Yep. And if you want to look for it, I mean, there are T-shirt companies in Detroit and New Orleans geared towards that community, like with the things that community is most proud of, right? In New Orleans, you have pictures of different seasons, and it's crawfish season and football season, right? So like that's the way we see our seasons, because we don't have seasons. There's no winter, right? So, I mean, there's a real pride in that place. In my mind, that's actually where entrepreneurs can thrive. Because if you have entrepreneurs in a place where they are surrounded by community and they're embraced, and they're not just trying to solve something just for themselves, and they're not just trying to create something to make someone a buck, but they're actually doing it in a way that's going to uplift the people around them, that's powerful. And we saw that right after Katrina. And so that's where Propeller got its start. Propeller is a early stage social enterprise incubator, accelerator program, a co-working space. And I'm proud to say that we are launching a low-interest loan fund that I'd love to talk to anybody in the room who's interested in something really innovative that's going to provide low-interest loans and debt solutions as opposed to just equity for
Awesome.
our ventures. But what we saw after Katrina is that people were solving problems because they weren't waiting for anyone else to do it. There were street signs that were just gone. And I will push back just a second, Julia. It was a man-made failure, just like the financial crisis and
Right.
just like the
Yes.
issues of social
Yes.
justice and justice.
Yes, people stink in many ways, Rob.
The levees broke, y'all. And that was our failure. There were cracks and we knew it, and the levees broke. It was not just a natural disaster, it was a man-made disaster. And so if these are man-made problems, what the flip of it that we're talking about is man-made solutions and woman-made solutions, right? And that's what's awesome when you talk about a place like Propeller, where we see entrepreneurs every day that we're helping with, but then the work that they're doing in the community has these ripple effects where we've created 250 plus jobs in the 5 years we've been around. And you see them all working together and giving each other connections, and it's a real sense of community. It's not a rat race in the way that you would experience in the New York or the San Francisco I took off the list.
So let me jump in there for a second. I totally agree with you, this idea, and one of the things that we're seeing at Arabella is this idea of, particularly in the impact investing space, which was kind of, it was really led here in the San Francisco Bay Area. You had a lot of East Coast sort of early assimilation into it, but now what we're seeing is actually these sort of mid-sized cities. So whether it's St. Louis or Nashville or Atlanta or Cleveland or Ohio. It's been really, really interesting, the work that we've seen. I think that is the next wave, and I'm excited about that because the opportunities for place-based investing, this idea of really addressing issues in your community is really, really powerful. One of the things that I noted when I was researching this panel over the weekend was when you look at the statistics for Baltimore or for Detroit or for New Orleans in terms of unemployment rates, in terms of equitable distribution of capital, when you look at sort of a lot of the basic numbers in most of these places, they're abysmal. They're terrible. These are terrible, terrible numbers. And yet, when you talk to people, there's incredible pride. And so one of the things I was really drawn to is the idea that an individual or a company or a feeling could really drive this whole momentum. And so I was wondering if we could kind of talk about that a little bit. And I don't know if there's something to comment in terms of like what you've seen with your and with Kevin's commitment to Baltimore, what kind of effect that's had on the overall community and what the ongoing impact has been.
Well, I think it's going to be pretty significant if we can complete, the work that we've started to do now, rebuilding what we call Baltimore's front porch, right? So when you drive down 95, I think 42 million cars a year. It's really the only national exposure the city gets. They look out now, and it's, like I said, it's a barren wasteland, and so we can convert that into, a major metropolis that then pulls you off 95 and gets you to come and see the city for what it really is. Then, I think that's going to be successful. If you look at what we've done today, I mean, it's really just, the impact that Under Armour's had, and it's pretty significant. I mean, it's a fairly large company to be headquartered in Baltimore. Baltimore, I think, is one of the statistic. It's one of the only cities in the top, 25, I guess, in size without a Fortune 500 company. But Under Armour is knocking at the door. They'll be there, I think, in a year or maybe a year and a half. So anyway, that's the impact that we're going to have today is through that one company. But the impact that we'll have tomorrow is through the stuff that we're doing on the private side with Kevin Plank and using his wealth to keep companies there and bring them there. So.
And can I ask you really quickly, I mean, one of the things that we talked about when I first met you was bringing light manufacturing back to Baltimore. And so one of the trends that I think I'm noticing is manufacturing jobs have declined dramatically in the U.S., whereas kind of white collar, you guys have Johns Hopkins in the community, you have a lot of these tech sort of, higher paying jobs, but less and less. So I know that's part of your strategy to bring light manufacturing back to Baltimore, and I know that Shinola has this kind of work as well. So I wondered if you could just talk about what you envision for that.
Yes, look, I can rail on that for a while. So let's talk about bringing manufacturing back to the United States. And it's something that, I've gotten to know Shinola really well over the last couple of years because they are really this huge beacon of trying to make that happen, right? And I'm going to be really honest and tell you that it's incredibly challenging. If you look at the struggle you have with really honestly bringing manufacturing back. We talk about it and we say oh yeah, we should bring the jobs back from overseas and we lost all of our jobs. Well, the problem is the jobs are gone, right? The training's gone, it chased cheap labor. And so to bring manufacturing back in its current state as it exists overseas is just not feasible, right? I can build a factory the size of one in Shenzhen or Guangzhou and give it to a city, and there aren't enough sewers left in the country to physically fill it, all right? So it's a myth. So don't think for 1 second that we're going to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. by building 5 million square foot factories and just filling it full of people that make $2 a day. It's not going to happen. So we got to get smarter about it, and we got to figure out how we actually do it. So, it's an interesting project that we're working on with Under Armour called Project Lighthouse, right? And you can look it up and check it out. But basically, what if we flip this whole manufacturing model on its head and said, okay, instead of trying to build a 1 million square foot factory in one place that has a 12 to 18 month product production cycle, makes a bunch of stuff, sticks it in a container, puts it on a ship, and pushes it out to different distribution points throughout the world, what if we shrunk that down to 40,000 square feet? And that little tiny micro factory just made the products for that one local market. And then we really innovated on the process, right? So we made the process more efficient. Because right now, the process to make a pair of shoes, believe it or not, is the exact same process that's existed for 100 years. In this pair of shoes that I'm wearing, 200 people touch this pair of shoes. 200 people touch this pair of shoes, right?
201.
201. And a third of the weight of the shoe is cement. There's all these things that there is so much opportunity to innovate on the process that you could actually bring it back to the States. Now, is it going to employ the same number of people as it does, in Shenzhen or Guangzhou? No, it's not, right? But it's going to be sustainable for the next 50 to 100 years.
Well, and they should be better jobs and they should be living wage jobs.
100%. If you really, you go to a factory, apparel factory over in China, tell me, pick any job over there that you'd want someone in America. It's not good stuff. So we got to make it better. We got to make it smarter, and we're going to do it a different, more efficient way. And I think that's how we actually bring it back. And we're prototyping it in Baltimore. We're pushing the processes out to different factories we have in the States. They're making product now. It's shipping now. And our production cycle times are coming down from 18 months to 18 days to half that time. So it's working. The products are more efficient. They're consistent. They're better. And we just have to make it cost effective, right? So it has to cost the same amount of money or thereabouts to do this, or it just isn't sustainable. Because we're only going to pay a premium for local made stuff for so long, and at scale, it really starts to fall apart.
So, Bridget, you talked a little bit about manufacturing already, so I want to come back to this idea about the knock-on effect, the added sort of leverage point of Shinola investing in Detroit and sort of shining a spotlight on Detroit and bringing pride and kind of new energy. And I know Dan Gilbert, who's the founder of Quicken, who has started making a bunch of investments in Detroit as well. There's a number of foundations that have been supported. And so I wondered if you could talk a little bit about what you see. Like, what are the other things that are going on in Detroit, many of which are things that have been kind of motivated by this investment by Shinola in Detroit?
I mean, certainly we are not the only folks, and it's not just us and Dan Gilbert. There are so many people, and I think that's what's exciting. But it is the coolest
brand in America, according to Adweek.
And that's what Adweek said. and we appreciate that. I mean, the amount of support that we've received, first of all, locally, and then, just there's so many expats from Detroit living in different places, from New York to London to Paris, who really never forget. There's a sense of pride about that city. If you think, though, historically, it was a city that really helped build this country.
Right.
So when we first launched, we didn't know if this would resonate outside of Detroit, outside of Michigan, for that matter. But what we found is it's about that message of hope. It's about that sense of pride, of making things. Making things that last, not this sort of throwaway culture. There's a movement, right, in food, of slow food. Now it's talking about slow fashion. It doesn't mean H&M is going anywhere. But I think there are consumers out there who are buying less and buying better, who do care about the story behind their products, whether they be sitting in Detroit or sitting in London for that matter, and they like to be able to tell that story. And going back to the manufacturing piece, if you're going to get into this business, you have to provide that training because it doesn't exist.
Right.
So you need to go out, first of all, essentially start a PR campaign to get people interested in even considering these jobs, because I grew up in a factory, and the last thing my mom wanted me to do was work in the factory. But the truth of it is it put food on our table and put both, my brothers and myself through school, and we had a pretty nice life. So, those are the kinds of things now, and I can't speak for every factory in America, but certainly, working at Shinola, you've walked through our factory, It's awesome. A pretty nice place to work.
It's awesome.
There's windows and light and music playing and health benefits and...
So it's a different model of manufacturing.
Yes.
It's putting aside that kind of old model of like sort of the I don't know what you call it, that kind of what is that little rodent that runs on a wheel? Why am I blanking?
The rat race?
The rat,
hamster?
whatever. Hamster wheel, that's what I'm
Yeah.
thinking. So it's not that, it's actually creating it as a quality job here in America in a different model.
It's giving people options.
Right,
Sure.
right. So, Rob, you don't represent in this context a company or an individual who's investing. So what I was interested over lunch, you talked about some of the investments that Propeller has empowered, and some of them were super, super interesting. Yes. And some of them actually addressed the affordable housing issue that somebody brought up earlier. So I'd love,
Sure.
I hope it's not too much of a jump. Is everybody okay with me taking this leap? Okay, good. So I would love it if you would talk about a couple of those investments and how those have affected New Orleans.
Sure. So the one on housing, just to knock that out, I love it when you're solving multiple problems with the same sort of creative solution. And this one's called Youth Rebuilding New Orleans. What you saw is so many people wanted to come down and help to rebuild New Orleans, right? I mean, raise your hand if you've been to New Orleans post-Katrina. Look at that, y'all. Look at that. Raise your hand if you were a part of some sort of a relief or recovery project. Thank you. Thank you. Like, the folks in New Orleans know that you helped them, and we're helping other folks in Baton Rouge and wherever we can. We pay it forward, right? But so this example is a group called Youth Rebuilding New Orleans. They buy up blighted housing, okay? And then they train kids, basically, opportunity youth. Many of them are in school or kind of in and out of school to rebuild these houses. Oftentimes, then when they resell the houses, the kids will be selling to their teachers. The model is that they sell to teachers at 80% of market rate. And so they're still making money on the spread, but the beauty is that you're training up kids to get real skills in case they aren't able to graduate from college or even high school. You're giving them project management skills so you can move up in the system. And you're putting blight houses back in the marketplace for teachers who are able to afford to live in New Orleans as they want to stay there and teach. Like, how cool is that, right? Like, that's like solving multiple problems at once. And it happens all over. I mean, in Detroit, there's a group that it's the car hat coats that you have.
Empowerment plan.
Empowerment plan.
Oh, yeah.
You want to talk
Yeah.
about that in a second?
Yeah, she's amazing. Veronica Scott.
She was actually here. I saw her at SOCAP probably 5 or 6 years ago, and it was her first sleeping bag jacket.
Yeah.
So she's a graduate of CCS. We're actually based in the College for Creative Studies. And she had this idea to employ homeless women who now, of course, thanks to working with the Empowerment Plan, are no longer homeless. And many of them are single moms. And they sew sleeping bag coats and hand them out in the winters. If you've ever been to Detroit in the wintertime, it gets pretty cold. They piloted that in Detroit. Now she's in multiple cities. I've lost track, actually, as to how many cities she's in. And she's at the point now, mind you, she's also teaching sewing, right? So they end up graduating and taking, many of them go on into other sewing positions or into, they learn certain sort of life skills by going through that process and go on, maybe to an entirely different career.
Yeah.
And it's just phenomenal what she's done. And now I know she's looking, as I've gotten to know Veronica over the course of living in Detroit, at a for-profit model where they would actually retail the coats and then proceeds would go back into funding the program.
Right. And that was her idea 5 or 6 years ago, which is interesting. She stuck to her. She stuck to her.
I mean, she's a
sort of mission.
powerhouse.
Right.
You would never know that she's under 30.
Yeah.
I mean, man, that girl's
it's
smart.
impressive. I have a million other questions, but I'm just wondering, do any of you, should we just start opening up questions? Because I'd love this to be, I know it's late, and so I want to keep you guys awake and engaged here in what we're doing. So, we have a question right here. Where did our mics go? Hold on one second, hold on. We have somebody young and vibrant running over there with a mic. It's fabulous, thank you. Over here. Yay.
I actually don't fit into any. I have a production company that focuses on promoting social change through the concept of hope.
Okay.
And now with Shinola and Under Armour, how do you guys, besides obviously job creation is huge, but the more entrenched issues in some place like Baltimore and Detroit, the housing issues in Detroit, the neighborhoods that are empty and that type of things, and obviously the social injustice in Baltimore. How do you guys invest in that as companies, as community members?
And do you invest in that?
I mean, for us, really, we're investing in our people and in our workforce who and then take that home, and that affects their immediate families, the communities in which they live in. We do have a REACH program where we have a task force within the organization that come up with different community-related initiatives that we support as a team. So we've actually adopted a family in a local school that's literally down the block. We serve food during, office hours. People will sign up, during Thanksgiving. So there's a number of community initiatives that the employees ourselves kind of do. And really, by the nature, we're not going to solve Detroit's problems single-handedly. I mean, that, it's a community effort. The one thing I can say, if anything, we've been able to do is shine a positive light on Detroit. I don't know if John Varvatos would have opened up a store if we didn't open up a store there. I don't know if Kit and Ace would have opened up a store, and I'm not suggesting we single-handedly did that.
Yeah.
But I think it helped. We got lucky, and we shined a positive light to say, yeah, I don't know if you guys saw the ad that we did when Detroit announced bankruptcy. 2 days later in the New York Times, we put out an ad that said, for all those of you who've given up on Detroit, we give you the Birdie. And it happened to be a new watch that we were launching that coincidentally was called the Birdie. So hopefully in our lighthearted way, we've been able to shine a positive light to encourage businesses to come into town. No one knew that retail would do well in Detroit, and we certainly are, and the neighborhood is. So hopefully by the nature of what we're doing, that has a positive impact in a variety of ways.
Well, and I want to ask you to talk about public-private, but did you have any thoughts on?
Yeah, no, so I think specifically to like, what is the company doing, in our case, Under Armour, to invest in the actual community? And it's concerning because I think with a lot of this, and maybe you see it more here in Silicon Valley than you do in these smaller cities, but as you bring companies in and as you add this wealth, is it redistributed, into these different pockets, or are they left behind? I got a chance to really, over the last 9 months, see this discussion unfold. We had to go out for public dollars to, it's called TIF funding, to build sewers and roads and that sort of stuff with this abandoned peninsula. And let me tell you, it's like running for Senate. I mean, it's pretty brutal. But that question comes up, and it's real and it's just, right? And you have to figure out, are we just going to bring in more, rich folks that don't get the cash back to me? So what we're doing, number one, Under Armour is very focused on delivering access to sport, right? So if you look and see a lot of these inner city schools in Baltimore, not in the greatest of shape. We've built half a dozen or so fields, computer centers, given these kids someplace they can be proud of to play sports. And they were playing on, prior to this, I'm not joking, a football field, but they have spray paint around the rocks. They couldn't run certain plays because that was where the rock was. And now it's a NFL quality level field, which is really, really cool to see. And that transitions into these kids now not letting it get tagged with spray paint, and they have pride in their team and all that stuff. And that'll resonate for the rest of their lives. And so that's great. On our end, we're heavily investing in workforce development. We're building a gigantic center to train folks that are actually going to be building these buildings. We're building this peninsula and creating the jobs and getting folks to learn how to do these trades. And so we have mandates to employ a certain percentage of Baltimore citizens. We love it. We've doubled down on all of it.
Thank you, yeah. And Rob, I was wondering if you could comment from a New Orleans standpoint, because amongst this group here, you have the most sort of public-private experience. Like, how do you address systemic change? What are some of the solutions? What are the lessons that people can take?
Sure. So there's a statistic that I want everyone just to sort of take a moment and try and get your heads around, which is that in New Orleans, in my city, 56% of black men are unemployed.
Or unemployed?
Unemployed. 56%. And for me, that's, of course, a moral issue, but it's an economic issue. If you look at the data, what the data show is that 2005, so this is data that was collected before Katrina, to 2013. In 2005, this is median white income, was $49,000 a year. 2013, it was $60,000 a year. Median black income was $23,000 a year in 2005. In 2013, it was $25,000 a year. So all the success that we've seen in our city's recovery, and there has been quite a bit, and I'm very proud of what we've done, but there's a lot left to be done to make that truly equal and to make that something that we talk about systems. I'm proud to say at Propeller, like, we focus on it as an issue of systemic racism. And for us, we need systemic changes, a collective systemic effort across every sector which we work in, whether it's food access, because it is disproportionately affecting black people, whether it's healthcare, education. All of these issues are, in our minds, something that we have to have systemic changes so that we can truly make it so that those systems affect people in a way that's much more equitable.
And what's the best way to affect systemic change? Is it to empower women entrepreneurs, entrepreneurs of color? Is it to bring in regulatory change? What would you throw out there as like top 3 ways to sort of start affecting change?
It's all of the above and then some. I mean, for me, if you guys look at anything that I ever put out there, it's public-private everything, right? That's what I believe. For me, you need a cross-sector solution, and that means, like, own it yourself, okay? So for me, whether it's the work I do through my job or the work I do supporting, charity work or in my church or in my community, like, all of it has to be seen through a lens where I'm checking myself and understanding that I need to address this issue through every aspect of my life. And I think if everyone was doing that in a more thoughtful way,
right,
really undoing that and then moving forward with a
So
new
it's an
lens.
awareness and an
Yeah, so I think it's a
education.
personal thing, but it's also
Okay.
it is a let's build collective masses of people who are going to be solving various aspects of problems,
Yeah.
and doing so in a way that's much more equitable
Yeah.
and much more for the greater good. I mean, ultimately, this is an issue of race, but it's also an issue of we're all in this together.
Right.
And if there are 56% of any group that are being left behind and being told for incarceration issues and for the fact that they aren't getting healthy nutrition as they're growing up, or
Yeah.
that their teachers have given up on them.
It's a
Like,
problem.
if you don't have neighbors that are loving them or parents that are able to be there for all of this,
Yeah.
like you can't single out any one issue, so let's do it all.
Okay.
And that's why I think that we're trying to do in New
Yeah.
Orleans.
Thank you. Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Hey, Ben Orgelai from Baltimore. So I was interested because you were talking about the need to kind of address all these systemic issues. But I guess my question is, how do you affect these issues when you're dealing with a demographic that they are untrained, unskilled workers, and how do you actually go about effecting the change that's going to actually allow them to get these sustainable jobs? I mean,
Right.
is it a matter of training? You're not going to not everybody's going to be an entrepreneur, not everybody's going to be able to be in a city garage.
Yep.
How do you go about bringing about those changes?
Yeah. And if I can just start with the answer on this, the project that we worked on behalf of this client that was focused on Baltimore, it was around addressing some of these issues. And our conclusion from it was using impact investing was super, super powerful, and there were some really, really interesting opportunities, but there was a lot of philanthropic capital needed as well. There's a really pioneering foundation, I think the ABLE Foundation in Baltimore, that's done some really interesting work about workforce development, about training, about building. So I think there's probably multiple levels of solutions, but that was what we found, and those were the recommendations that we made to our client was you probably need philanthropic funding for some part of this, and then you need to start partnering with manufacturing corporations, private businesses to start building out that infrastructure. Damien, I don't know how you want to chat about this?
Well, did I understand you right where you said it's not everyone can be an entrepreneur, so how do we get folks that aren't entrepreneurs? I didn't
Or
hear
how
all
do you
of
even,
that.
I thought, my understanding, you can certainly repeat the question, but my understanding was how do you even get people to the point where they can start looking at these light manufacturing jobs? Maybe
Right.
they don't have the education, maybe their reading and writing skills aren't sufficient.
Right. I think you have to get people introduced to these various trades and see if there's any interest, number one, right? I mean, you have to have interest in something at some point. It's not, it has to be a little bit of a give and take. But there has to be opportunity, I think, provided. So talk about the job side first, right? Root for companies like Shinola and Armour because they're going to offer, if they offer a job and that job is created and there's an opportunity for you to take that job, then there should also be a commensurate opportunity to be trained to take that job. One of the things that I'm working on with our workforce development program, here's where our workforce development falls apart, by the way, is that so it's a double-sided market, right? So you have someone creating this training curriculum over here, but there's no one to hire you at the end of it, right? So you need companies like the Shinolas and the Armours of the world to come out there and say, okay, look, all right, great, we're going to set aside X number of jobs, and they're there, they're waiting. Come through this program, which you set up, and then when you get through, it's already married up and it's already matched up. So we're working on stuff like that. Just 2 seconds on the entrepreneurial side. I hear this a lot when we're in these in different environments, and what we have to do is there has to be access to capital for folks that don't come from a place where they have ever seen or know anyone that has access to capital, right? So we all think, hey, well, it doesn't matter what color you are in America 2016, if you have a good idea, you should be able to get funded, kind of, except, I know when I started my company and I knew people with a couple bucks. I didn't come from a lot, but like I could borrow money and my friends had some money, my parents had a little bit. So you're talking about a group of people though that they don't know anybody with money. They don't have a peer group they can say, yeah, I've got $5,000 I can lend you. So it is really important to have access to this early stage capital to get these ideas from the back of a napkin to something real, and then it can come to the real capital markets, and then we can invest in it. So
Can I say a quick word on
Yeah, please.
access to capital? So
Yeah.
that's something I'm personally passionate about because, we're sitting in one of the states out of 3 that gets 75% of all VC money in the United States.
Here.
Okay?
Here in California.
Massachusetts, New York.
New York.
75% of VC money goes to those 3 states. Okay? So you're telling me that only the other 47 states only have 25% of the good ideas. And if you look at who gets that VC money, it's privileged white men for the most part. Okay? It's mostly privileged white men making the decisions. and privileged white men getting the investment. And I'm check me on the data on this, guys. I mean, I'm not just saying it just to sound off. This is real. And it means that we're not investing in the new ideas of people who have problems that aren't like the ones that the privileged white men are experiencing or trying to solve. And so for me, I need to find real ways to create access to capital for the people that I'm working with who may not fall in that category.
Yep.
They're in Louisiana. They may not be male. They may not be white. And they may not have an education that allows them to know how to navigate a venture capital pitch, right?
Right.
And so part of what we're trying to do at Propeller is create a low-interest loan fund that allows people to get working capital, very small, like 20,000 to 200K at an 8% interest rate, which is far below what they can get from the banks or anybody else. And then we graduate them up in the banking system, so they may never even need to take on equity as an investment. They could just use debt. And I think it's something that within the SOCAP community, I mean, I was here year 2, equity has become such a great conversation in terms of what we worked on. I was at Village Capital before I took this job, and I really believe in the opportunity for equity to solve a lot of problems, but it's not the only solution.
Right.
I think low interest debt is something that more and more foundations should be looking to try and figure out how they can get capital in the hands of folks who can then solve the problem.
And if I can say, Rob, I mean, just anecdotally, I've been at Arabella since January of this year, and this is the bulk of our projects. The bulk of it is trying to develop opportunities and access to capital for non-traditional sources. And I think a lot of foundations are thinking about that. I think a lot of high net worth have started identifying. So we're having that conversation, and I'm pleased about that. I hope that's a good answer to your question for now. Are there other questions in the audience? Let me start here, and then I see you in the back. Yes, sir.
Hi. This question is directed to Damien, I guess. So you brought up the tax increment financing deal, and we've been talking a lot about equity right now. So I wanted to ask, with the tax increment financing deal, I believe the numbers are a $535 million tax increment finance bond, for which the city of Baltimore taxpayers would have to pay back $1.4 billion over the next 41 years. Now, given that Under Armour, Kevin Plank, and Sagamore have put a lot into this project already. I believe it's $5.5 billion total development cost. You put a lot of money and investment into this already, and not to mention the rest of the city and what Under Armour has done for the rest of the city. So I'm just wondering, what was the thinking behind why you needed to go for that $535 million TIF, for which Baltimore taxpayers would pay back $1.4 billion over the next 41 years?
Did you think we were going to have like softball questions because it's a
No.
social enterprise
And
conference?
I probably shouldn't answer TIF questions, but whatever. I'll take this one. First of
we're
all,
getting shots
Baltimore
afterwards.
citizens don't pay back the taxes, so that's inaccurate. The companies that move there and pay tax in the buildings that they rent, they pay the taxes back. So that's number one. Number two, it's not an either-or argument either, so that's a big misconception that the city of Baltimore has this big giant stack of money, and they're wondering what to do with it, and they're going to give it to this rich billionaire guy, and he's going to take it and do what he wants with it. It's not true at all. They're a middleman that takes investor dollars and then hands it to the group that's going to use them to build infrastructure, right? So, and the third part is $5.5 billion is an estimated value of the project going forward. It's not how much has been spent so far. So let's make sure that's 100% clear too.
Awesome. Thank you. Sir.
Hi, my question's for Shannon. I'm a proud native of Detroit.
Shannon, Bridget?
I'm sorry, Bridget. Yes. Sorry.
There is a woman that works at Shinola named Shannon.
I think she's in the program, and I think that's what that was your name.
No, it's-
I'm a proud native of Detroit, although I live here now. We have a little better weather, but thrilled with what Shinola is doing in Detroit. And I just had a question in terms of your employee base. What percentage actually live within the city limits versus outside of Detroit? Because obviously, a greater number of employees in the city would generate more economic benefit directly.
Well, for us, most of the folks, working for Shinola actually do live in the city. It was the opposite for many of them that worked in automotive, because a lot of, as you probably know, when there were more automotive factories in Detroit, they were actually outside of Detroit, Dearborn, et cetera. So a lot of the folks that are working for us are happy that they actually don't have to travel so far to go to work, that they can pick up their kids from school and have plenty of time for dinner and all of that. As far as maybe people working like me, working on the marketing team, our executive team, all of us happen to live in Detroit. The biggest challenge, I will say, and then you guys have read the news, is the school system. So you have this issue, and I went, to public junior high. That's not really an option if you want your kids to go to a good public school and you live in Detroit. There's some great charter schools, but it's a problem. So there are still people, definitely those folks who have kids, I don't, who move outside of Detroit, not necessarily because they don't want to live in Detroit, but because of the schools. So their kids are going to Grosse Pointe, or they're driving their kids from Detroit to Grosse Pointe. So that needs to be fixed.
I think that needs to be fixed in San Francisco too, is my understanding. So yeah,
it's an unfair system.
Yeah.
At a base level, there should be, a certain level of education that's provided in a clean environment
Safe.
where kids, exactly,
Yeah.
safe environment where there aren't holes in the ceiling.
That's right.
And that's a big problem.
So I want to be mindful of everybody's desire to get to your events. We have 8 minutes according to the clock. Are there other questions that we can address? We've got a gentleman in the back and a woman up here.
Hey, my name's Christian. I'm also from Detroit, and I was wondering.
Hey.
Oh, hey there.
How you doing?
Good. How about yourself? I was wondering what you think the trajectory of light manufacturing coming back to the States look like in terms of that mix of technology meets manufacturing, and how that process starts to move toward regional manufacturing versus scale offshore. What you think that might look like.
That's interesting.
I think definitely, well, there's a couple of factors that are happening. There's definitely a need for small batch manufacturing, so it is less about
Right.
the 20,000 square foot
Right.
manufacturers, but really, look at Etsy, right? All these people who were making stuff at home now have grown their business to a certain point where they need to seek out outside manufacturing. They don't want to do it overseas because they still want to be able to go to the factory, see it, but their orders are 250 units,
Right.
maybe 500 units per SKU. So small batch manufacturing, I think, is going to be important moving forward. And also, from a workforce development standpoint, providing those skills and that training in a format where there's a funnel that you go in because there's some basic reading and writing skills that some of these folks don't have coming in, providing the training, and then
The
working
jobs on the other side.
Exactly. And so that's a partnership. When the question came up earlier, that how does that work? It is a partnership. It's a partnership with the public school system. It's a partnership with the city, with other businesses. We certainly cannot hire everyone that goes through the program. So Lear's involved, Carhartt's involved, and that's how it works.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Damien, just around the light manufacturing and?
No, I mean, I think I touched on a lot before, and
Yeah.
that's spot on.
Yeah.
I mean,
Okay. How many people are here from Detroit? It seems like we have a big old Detroit representation. Baltimore? Nice.
1, 2,
Nice.
3.
New Orleans.
Well, go
Come on.
Ravens. 1.
One more question. I think let's have a question over here, and then if it's quick, we'll see how we go here. Tell us.
Hi, so I work with college students, primarily helping them to start companies. And, people really look at universities as anchor institutions in their community. So how have you guys seen universities play a role in city renewal?
Rob, do you want to start? Rob actually, as part of his extensive bio, also teaches and lectures. So I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. Wonderful question. I mean, especially post-Katrina, there's a whole need for that next generation to own the recovery of the city, right? And so Tulane did a great job of, especially under Scott Cowan, making social enterprise very forefront and making volunteering and being part of the community. So town-gown relationships really changed there. I teach at Loyola University in New Orleans, and there's a really engaged entrepreneurship program where the students, both of my classes, the students are getting real-world experience. So in the class I'm teaching this fall, it's having students working with the local angel network to do due diligence on the deals that they're seeing. And in the spring, we have a partnership with NASA. The Stennis Center is right across the border in Mississippi, and Loyola and NASA have partnered to basically commercialize technologies using Lean Launchpad out of NASA. We worked on a new valve technology. I can tell you more about valves than probably anyone in the room. I never thought I'd learn that, and the students did 100 interviews, customer interviews, to try and test that idea and did quick iteration on that. And so mean, those are the types of experiences that like they're getting a quality of an education in the real world that is really powerful. And in my mind, the reason why it matters, like the reason why I spend my time to do it is because when I come from a family of school teachers and I love teaching, but more it's just that I want my city over the next generation to really have people who get this, who really, whether they're investors one day or whether they're, starting their own companies, I want them to live and breathe the idea that social entrepreneurship can actually really change the city through them creating something that could be great for us. And so I'll be really candid. When I think about having, so my wife is pregnant. She's due January 29th. And so thank you. And so when I think about like that kid's life, right now there's one Fortune 500 company in New Orleans. And most of the economy is built on tourism, trade, and we have a bunch of startups that are really striving, but like there's no real opportunity to come back if you want to work in, pick your sector, right? And so I don't want that for my kid, and so that's the voyage I'm seeing, right? Is if I can help to create a bunch of folks who are all getting this and really understand it in my community, they'll be the ones who can hire my kid one day. And one of the best pieces of advice I got in New Orleans is do not flip anybody off in traffic, because they may need to be the one that's writing the letter of recommendation for your kid to go to college or something, right? And so the community really matters in that regard, and I think that's something that really does fit with academia as a big piece of that.
I feel like one of the, and I'm winding this down now because we're towards the end of our session here and I know everybody's exhausted, but I feel like one of the things that has come across to me at least in this idea of how do you rebuild, how do you reinvest in a place that's been destabilized or marginalized in some fashion it's a ton of partnership based. I mean, you have to have people who are willing to take the lead, they're willing to make an investment, but then you have to bring in everybody. You have to bring in educational institutions, you have to bring in the government, you have to bring in philanthropy, and you have to bring in individuals, all of whom are willing to either be the entrepreneur, support the entrepreneur. And so that's my big takeaway lesson is I feel like you hear that in all of these strategies, and I hope if you are working in a city that's trying to figure out its next strategy, how to rebuild and reinvest in its community, that's one of the primary ways to do that. So please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Enjoy SOCAP. Thank you so much for staying this late to be part of this panel. We really appreciate it. Have a good evening.
Thanks.
Thank y'all.